First story. I think it was the day following July 4th. It was summertime. I was halfway through a cross-country road trip with my spouse. For those of you who have driven the entire length of Texas, you are aware that it is an extremely vast and desolate state. We were traveling through Texas. There were times when we would travel for hours without seeing much at all, and the towns we did visit were barely more than a few dusty tiny cottages and a rusted old gas station. You would think that you were continuously traveling through the same 5 miles of desert if you were to stare out the window. My husband suggested that I take a little nap to relieve the headache that I had just started to experience. I recall letting myself drift off to sleep while I took in the stunning hues of a desert sunset. I was startled awake by the cars slowing, and my initial impression was how black it was. It was, I think, around 10 p.m. My spouse had made a stop at a little shop attached to a gas station. He inquired if I needed to urinate and said he was going to get us some dinner. I went into the shop to use the restroom, realizing I would not get another chance for a bit. The shop's open area and the men's and women's facilities were separated by a small hallway. I shuffled into the bathroom, realizing how much I needed to urinate despite my fatigue and grogginess. I quickly made my way from the door to the closest of the 2 stalls, and as I did so, I locked eyes with a woman who was leaving the only other stall. Although she didn't appear to be homeless, she did look disheveled. Her hair was a wild gray color that would have reached her shoulders if it hadn't been sticking out of her head in all directions. It appeared to have gone weeks without seeing a brush. She was also dressed shabby, sporting an ill-fitting pair of black gym shorts. Her foam flip-flops with multiple layers on top, including a huge coat in purple and green, are what I recall. Remember, this is July in Texas. The jacket was slung lopsidedly over her shoulders, as if she'd forgotten to spend a few more seconds to put it on properly. She had a plastic shopping bag wrapped up with something inside of it. Her eyes met mine, and I smiled briefly, but all she did was stare at me. Her expression then became passionate and wild. Her eyes had a wild, alive appearance, and even though her eyebrows were fixed as if she were angry, this was the first hint that something was off. I attempted to ignore it. She waddled up to the single sink, and I was trying to figure out why she seemed to be posing oddly in front of the mirror, so I took my time closing the stall door. Her face was directed toward the mirror, but her body was more inclined toward me. Her legs were slightly crouching as though she was about to break out, and her body was strained. Her hands weren't washing her hair, holding her face, or even trying to straighten it. She had them by her sides, her elbows bending slightly. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but something felt off. I felt bad for leaving my phone and handbag behind. I took my time using the restroom and closed and locked the stall door. Before I left the security of the stall, I wanted her gone. I waited longer because the woman was still there even after I had finished. At last, I heard her flip-flops smacking as she approached the door, and I heard the door open before slamming shut. The door banged the same way it had when I had in, and it was fairly heavy. I hesitated with my fingers inches from the lock for a second, allowing the rush of relief to pass over me before reaching for it. I kept as quiet as I could to be sure that what I had just assumed to be noises was respiration. Indeed, the woman had merely feigned to depart. I was afraid and confused at this point. Why would she lie to me and make it seem like she was going somewhere, only to return and be as quiet as possible? I lingered in the stall longer because I knew something was seriously wrong, and I had no way of knowing for sure, but it had to have been at least 20 minutes. She had positioned herself in the far corner, close to the door, but far enough away that I couldn't see her feet. Based on the direction, I could tell she was breathing. At last, I believed I heard her go away this time. I bided my time for many minutes to ensure she hadn't attempted her ruse once more. I swiftly exited the restroom, cleaned my hands, and hurried along the store's hallway. She couldn't be far, even though it was completely dark outside and I had no idea where she was. I waited by a window display until the big man finished checking out at the register and slid out the door without a word. It turned out that the woman was crouching just outside the front door. She stood looked away and hurried around the side of the shop, seeming astonished. Because I had taken so much longer than usual, my husband, who was waiting for me in the car, asked me if I was okay. I promised to tell him everything as soon as we left that store. Narrative 2. I should say that I adore driving. Like aimlessly extended trips lasting hours to nowhere. The journey ahead of me, my music, and me alone. When I lived in Nebraska, I would frequently go on lonely highways or back roads that would lead me from the countryside to little towns and eventually cities. Additionally, since there was less traffic to worry about at night, I would typically take these drives. To put things in perspective, I'm a 22-year-old woman who is reasonably tiny, and as I've mentioned previously, I frequently go on these drives by myself. When I'm anxious, upset, or overwhelmed, they help me decompress and help me come up with a plan to deal with personal matters. I used to live with my parents, and one of my coping mechanisms for their drinking was to take long, solitary drives away from the terrible home environment. I don't really feel the need to get in my car and drive anymore, though, now that I've moved out, and my mental health has improved significantly. But the evening of this event, I was feeling a bit overburdened, tense, and nervous due to a number of personal matters that I would like not to discuss. I decided to take a drive to get my mind straight, because I was fidgety and agitated around my lover, and I was having trouble focusing on anything. It was becoming very late, so my boyfriend, who was very understanding, only advised me to use caution and not stay gone for too long. I nodded, kissed him goodbye, and walked out. I spent the next 30 minutes or so driving about our city, but I was still nervous about everything that was going on in my personal life. I made the decision to continue northward along those well-known, twisting, gloomy one-lane roads. I took the corners at a slower speed, keeping the car at a constant 65 mph in case a deer jumped beyond the curve, and all I was doing was gazing out at the wide, empty darkness of the woods and snow-covered plains. To be honest, being by myself in what seemed to be the middle of nowhere, with no automobiles in sight, was a little unsettling. The lifeless cornfields had shriveled and turned to snow, and there were a few houses kilometers distant from the road, abandoned and dark. It looked like something from a horror film, and I half expected to see someone scrambling out of the sparsely populated areas of trees, or see a ghost appear in my mirror. I had to strain to see through the pitch-black darkness of the night, even with my headlights, which were the sole source of light. It was about 11 exhaust by now, and I promised myself I would go home as soon as I turned the familiar corner that would take you to a little town or back up towards the metropolis. That detour was still another 25 minutes away, but other than imagining the worst, I wasn't particularly worried. After all, I was alone. I mean, I didn't have to worry about any other drivers. False, because I see a car with its hazards flashing, maybe a quarter of a mile away from me as I round another corner. It was a dark-colored car of some sort. Additionally, it was slanted so that just a portion of it was on the shoulder, and the remainder just strutted out onto the road, giving the impression that they were trying to pull over quickly, but were not quite able to. The driver's side door flew open, and as I had to veer my car to the other side of the road in order to go by, I noticed what appeared to be blood on the inside of the open door. I was the only car in sight, and I didn't see anyone else on the road or in the vehicle. Even so, cell phone service in this region of the country is, at best, poor. In most cases, however, no matter how hard you prayed, you would not be able to get reception, which, when I looked at my phone to check if I had any service, that undoubtedly the case. So here we have a lone woman driving at night approaching an abandoned car that appears to have been attacked from the inside and has no phone service. I'm not a fool now. I've read far too many real crime books and seen innumerable episodes of Criminal Minds and Investigation Discovery to not see that this had danger and lousy writing all over it. However, a tiny part of me continued to fear that whatever was inside that car had suffered a tragic accident, and I believed that I had to assist. Late at night, Not many cars use these routes, and the temperature was considerably below freezing. There was no one else who could help someone who was hurt or in difficulty, except myself. I erred on the side of caution nonetheless. I was only going a little slower in my automobile. I also turned off the music and partially rolled down my passenger window as I got closer to the car. I yelled, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" but got no answer. I was afraid they could have passed out someplace, but I was unable to go outside and find them. I promised myself that I would give it one more try and that I would walk away if I got no response, and I would report it as soon as I received a response. And at that point, I would decide what to do if I actually did hear someone. Once more I yell, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" And then there was a brief period of silence before I heard rustling in the tree shadows and a harsh voice responding, "Yeah." At first, I was relieved and ready to respond, maybe even pulling over and getting out of my car. But then I noticed three things almost at once. Considering the blood on the inside of the door, I thought it odd that the hood or any other part of the sedan remained unharmed as I picked my way out from the front. Something appeared from behind the sedan in my rearview mirror, and it was moving quickly in the direction of my automobile. The person was wearing a mask and did not appear to be hurt in any way, nor was there any blood on them. Not a ski mask, not a face mask for COVID, nothing like that. More like one of those masks you see in the Purge movies. In their hands they held something. I couldn't really get a good look, so I'm not sure what it was, but based on its length and shape, I believe it was either a tire iron or a crowbar. I don't have to tell you that as soon as I realized those things, I stepped on the gas. With my heart pounding out of my chest and my whole body trembling, I drove like a bat out of hell. With my window still down and the music still off, I could quite clearly hear someone shouting at me, definitely a man, though I had no idea what they were saying. I just felt I had to leave that place right away. As I drove away, I sneaked one more glance in my rearview mirror, largely to check if they had stopped or if they were getting into their sedan to drive after me. I could still see the man with the weapon standing in the center of the road, observing me. Just before I turned away from the mirror, I noticed another man come out of the trees that had been rustling. He too was wearing one of those eerie masks, and there was no sign of blood on him. That night, I speeded and probably broke every law there was, but I just wanted to get away from the men as fast as I could. I headed towards town as soon as I reached the roundabout, parked in the Walmart parking lot, where I imagined cars were still there from workers closing up shop, and then had a complete meltdown. I called my friend T, a police officer, when I was finally able to gather my courage and told him what had happened and what I should do. He was worried about me and wanted to know where I was, whether I was okay, if they were following me, and other things. He informed me that he couldn't do much because it was outside of the city limits, but he could get in touch with the sheriff or local police in that area to have my statement taken into consideration and investigated. That was all I could manage to accomplish. I thanked him and agreed, then contacted my partner to wait for the police to arrive. It was just 10 or so minutes ago that I told him what had happened, despite my panic and frantic weeping. You can imagine how terrified he was for my safety, and how urgently he wanted me to come home, or have him drive me home. I told him I couldn't go because the police were coming to take my statement, and that I was okay. But I didn't hang up on him until I saw the police cruisers pull into the lot. After I gave the police my account, they promised to look for the sedan where I said it had been and try to get the folks who had done this, but without any cameras or a description of the vehicle. Guys, I didn't think they would be able to. Even though I never gave it a second thought in my panic, I didn't even acquire the license plate number until the cops asked whether I had. So all they had to go on was 2 people in masks and a dark-colored vehicle. Following my statement, I returned home and spent the entire night cuddled up next to my partner, listening to every noise the house made and living in constant worry that those guys might show up at any moment to finish whatever it was they started. I'm not sure the cops will ever get back to me on whether or not they have any leads in relation to this occurrence. I was 16 years old when this event took place, just over 20 years ago. I was living in a secluded place 70 miles west of Las Vegas with my mother and stepfather during this period. For the first time ever, I was allowed to drive myself, so I went out to chat with my pals. Before it was time for me to go home, I had a great time eating dinner and watching a movie. I was given a curfew of 10 p.m., with the instruction to find a payphone and make a call if I was going to be late for any reason. For the most of the drive home, there were neither houses nor streetlights, so the night encircled my old '71 Chevy truck and me. An older vehicle with its hazards on was halted when I approached the first of 2 stop signs. After I parked behind it, a man in his 30s or 40s began to approach me from the driver's side. I wasn't experiencing any alarms even at this stage, as we were in the heart of the Mojave Desert. Helping out stranded individuals was routine. People quickly find themselves in serious trouble there when they don't have enough water when a car breaks down, or they may not realize that it's a desert and that people are dying while deliriously walking off the roadway in search of assistance. I let down my window and noticed that he had alcohol on him when he approached my door. There was another man in the passenger seat that I could see. I was unable to call the police on a drunk motorist right away, because this was before anyone I knew had a cell phone, and the closest payphone was at least 10 minutes away. The man asked whether I could help them, explaining that his car had stuck. When I questioned if his automobile had a stick gear, he said that it did, so I asked him if he knew how to start it with a push start. When he answered okay, I consented to gently push their automobile with my truck while they started the engine. For those who do not know, this is a method of starting a manual car that is experiencing problems with its battery or starter, with the goal of getting it to a repair shop. I didn't think it would be wise to jump out and try to physically push their car, because I knew my truck would be all right. In fact, pushing the automobile started it without any problems at all. However, this is when things go wrong. They thank me when they return, but they also extend an invitation for me to hang out and have some fun. Their words, not mine. I declined as a result. They stop at the side of the road, and as I carry on, they begin to follow me. I stop to assist them, so here I am, rushing late. I must admit that I hadn't given myself much grace before abandoning my pals. I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone, and these inebriated, eerie older guys have started to pursue me on a road, with no artificial light other than automobile headlights. Perhaps I'm just being paranoid, I thought to myself. I chose to go down a familiar road that would have provided me with 2 detours, one to return to the town and the other to the service station, including a payphone. As the automobile closes on my tail, I'm thinking, shit. I make another turn that ends at the end of the road at the handful of residences. Once more, they turn around behind me. They follow me again as I make another turn to circle back to the petrol station. Well, at least I know they're not just going home. They're actually following me. My heart is racing at this point, but I made the decision to attempt something to lose them. They come up behind me as I pull to the side of the road. I wait for the driver to exit the vehicle and come walking in my direction. His colleague exits the vehicle as well and begins to approach me. I hold off on flooring it until they are almost at my tailgate. I gain some distance on my wheels as they dig into the rocks behind me, creating a cloud of dirt. I make my way over to the gas station. The payphone is bathed in light from the gas pumps, even though the gas station is empty. I explain what happened and why I was running late when I give my parents a call. When my stepdad inquired if I could see the gas station employee, I told him that I was unable to see him behind the counter and that he was most likely in the back. I was told to get home quickly, although I wasn't in any danger.